In this video, we unpack the historical evidence behind the Gospels, eyewitness accounts, ancient documents, external sources, and early creeds, so your faith and your intellect don't collide. Most people think the Bible is about blind faith, but what if the Gospels actually have more historical evidence than the biographies of Caesar and Alexander the Great? Let's talk facts. If we're just meeting for the first time, I'm Stokes Mayfield, and I empower faith-driven real estate investors to bust through the inner barriers that stall your deals and drain your confidence. On this channel, you're going to get some of the best how-to, reaction, and strategy videos to help you go from stuck to moving forward with clarity and godly favor. Let's be honest, faith without evidence can feel like bad investing. Let's look at the receipts. We've been told to just believe, but that's not how we make business decisions. Eyewitness evidence. 1 Corinthians 15:6. Paul didn't dodge the skeptics. He dared them to go ask the eyewitnesses. Over 500 people saw Jesus alive after the crucifixion. And when Paul documented it, most of them were still alive. Translation: if you don't believe me, go ask them yourself. That's not mystical, it's verifiable. Luke names real historical rulers. There's Tiberius, Pilate, Herod and Antipas. That's not mythology. It's a timestamp. This is a paper trail, God style. Discernment doesn't compete with due diligence, it completes it. Let me say that again for those in the back. Discernment doesn't compete with due diligence, it completes it. As investors, we value verifiable data. Paul literally invites scrutiny. This shows that faith and scrutiny can coexist. 1 Corinthians 15:6. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time. Most of them are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Whether we're evaluating investments, partnerships, or divine assignments, discernment isn't the opposite of due diligence. It completes it. They didn't just see him. They gave up everything for what they saw. The disciples didn't just believe. They claimed they saw Jesus alive. And they faced torture, imprisonment, and death without recanting. Koishi adds, Christianity wouldn't have gotten off the ground if it weren't for that fact. And remember, James, Jesus' own brother, he didn't believe either until the resurrection changed everything. Or everything, depending on where you're from. Paul was the man who once hunted Christians. He wasn't even looking for faith. After one encounter with Jesus, everything flipped. Paul faced betrayal, beatings, and prison, and he still went all in. You don't give up everything for a one-time hallucination. Paul didn't endure because he was tough. He endured because he trusted the one who changed him. And that road to Damascus, that wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. You really think Paul didn't have more encounters with Jesus after that? Of course he did. Paul's suffering wasn't just loss. Loss may not have been God's will. I'm going to mess with some people. Loss may not have been God's will, but God used it. When Paul surrendered his old will, God started shaping a new one. I'm sure this was a process. And through that process, Paul didn't just learn theology, he learned God's heart. Paul wouldn't give up. Why? Because Paul had something no one else did, a testimony no one else could give but him. Critics say the Gospels were made up to sound convincing, but why include embarrassing failures? Peter denies Jesus. The disciples run away. And women whose testimonies weren't legally admissible in that culture are listed as the first witnesses of the resurrection. If you were trying to fabricate a story to convert the masses, none of that would make it in. It's what the scholars call the criterion embarrassment. If a detail hurts your case but still shows up in the story, it's probably because it actually happened. Cliff Canettle put it bluntly, historical knowledge is not based on medical records, it's based on the trustworthiness of eyewitnesses. The evidence is that Jesus really lived, really died, and really rose from the dead, and eyewitnesses wrote what they saw. Bottom line, they didn't die for inspiration, they died for resurrection. And that changes everything. The earliest creed timeline, Jesus didn't become a legend over time. This was the first message recorded within a few years. Paul quotes an early creed in 1 Corinthians 15. Most scholars date it to AD 33 to 36. Dr. Gary Habermas notes this is one of the earliest records of Christian belief. It declares the core message. Christ died, was buried, rose on the third day, and appeared to many. Secular and Christian scholars alike agree this creed is ancient, public, and testable. That makes this more faith. It's evidence with a paper trail. If you're new to the channel and get value, hit subscribe and check out the links in the show notes in the description below. External historical sources. Even Rome couldn't write Jesus out of history. Cliff Knettle shared Josephus, Tacitus, and Suetonius, two Roman historians, wrote about Jesus. Mara bar Serapion, a Syrian philosopher, wrote about the crucifixion of Christ. The Gomorrah, the Babylonian Talmud, and historians reference to Jesus as a false prophet to try and argue the only way we know about the historical Jesus is through the Gospels. It is not fair because it's not correct. Tacitus, Josephus, and Suetonius, who they were. Josephus was a first century Jewish historian and former military commander who defected to Rome. His works, The Jewish War and Antiquities of the Jews, reference Jesus, Pilate, and Herod. Josephus, what he said. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, he was the Christ, and when Pilate condemned him to the cross, he appeared to them alive again the third day. That's from the Antiquities of the Jews, Book 18, Chapter 3. Publius or Gaius Cornelius Tacitus was a heavyweight in Roman historiography. His works, Annals and Histories, mention Jesus' crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Tacitus, what he said. Christus, whom the name Christians had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. Annals, Book 15, Chapter 44. Suetonius, formerly Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus, was a Roman biographer whose Lives of the Caesars includes references to early Christians and the culture tension they stirred. Suetonius, what he said. Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, he, Claudius, expelled them from Rome. Lives of the Caesars, Claudius 25.4. Mara bar Serapion, who he was, a Syrian Stoic philosopher writing from prison sometime around AD 70. He wrote a letter to his son Serapion encouraging him to pursue wisdom. In it, he compares the unjust deaths of Socrates, Pythagoras, and the wise king of the Jews, widely accepted to be Jesus. Mara bar Serapion, what he said. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? It was just after that their kingdom was abolished, nor did the wise king die altogether. He lived on in the teaching which he had given. And the letter to his son, Syriac, manuscript C, later 1st to early 3rd century. The Gomorrah, the Babylonian Talmud, what it is. It's a central text of rabbinic Judaism, compiled between the 3rd and 6th centuries CE in ancient Mesopotamia. So not Cleonopotamia, but Mesopotamia. All right. The Gomorrah, the Babylonian Talmud, what it says. It calls Jesus a sorcerer, hostile, yes, but still acknowledging his power. Here's a quote. Even while calling it sorcery, the Talmud inadvertently affirms the miraculous, just framed negatively. As Nabil Qureshi put it, they're acknowledging the supernatural, even in their record, just rejecting the sources. For investors in truth, this matters when outsiders confirm the story. It holds weight. They didn't believe him, but they couldn't erase him. As investors, we know that even hostile or neutral voices confirm truth. Look at the evidence from beyond the bubble. Even those who oppose Christianity still recorded the same historical facts. That builds confidence that God's kingdom operates across systems. Relevant for those of us doing business with secular lenders, bankers, or contractors. The resurrection. They touched him, they ate with him. That's not a hallucination. Cliff Knettle. Luke 24, Jesus proves he's not a ghost. He invites them to touch him. He eats in front of them. That's not group hysteria, that's evidence. The disciples didn't die for a metaphor, they died for what they saw. And remember James, Jesus' own brother, he didn't believe either until the resurrection changed everything. Paul, former persecutor, lost everything because of one encounter. You don't die for a lie. You die because something changed you forever. Spiritual encounters can be tested, not just felt. Like good investments, they show fruit. Some skeptics say Jesus' followers hallucinated the resurrection. But when Jesus appeared in Luke 24, they thought he was a ghost, and he shut that down real quick. He told them to touch him. He ate fruit in front of them. That's not a hallucination, bruh. And people don't willingly die for something they know is a lie. The disciples didn't just believe. They claimed they saw him alive. And they died brutal deaths rather than deny it. This section dismantles the idea of wishful thinking or emotional hype. We often wrestle with being misled, especially in high-stake deals. This teaches that authentic spiritual encounters can be discerned and verified, and that even life-altering spiritual realities rest on more than feelings. They're grounded in reality. Witnesses saw him risen from the dead, and they wrote what they saw. That's historical knowledge. The Gospels have more historical evidence than the documents we use to build Wall Street.
Think about it. You trust contracts, market data, and investment records every day. The Gospels actually have more manuscript evidence backing them than the historical documents that form the foundation of modern business. That's not just faith, that's documented reliability.
More manuscripts support the Gospels than Herodotus, Buddha, or Alexander the Great.
And that same message shows up in Paul's letters, within just a few years of the resurrection. This wasn't folklore forming over centuries, it was immediate.
Investors check title history, comps, terms. We don't close deals on vibes. And early Christian creeds like 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8 go back to just a few years after Jesus' death, meaning the message wasn't some later invention. This is essentially a data integrity argument. If the Gospels are more verifiable than what Wall Street trusts for Greco-Roman economic foundations, then basing our life strategy on the words of Jesus isn't naive, it's logical. As investors who research title history, comps, and underwriting terms, we care about what's documented, tested, and preserved. This tells us we can trust the spiritual documents too. Credibility of the Gospel accounts and early manuscripts. Qureshi emphasizes the Gospels aren't written hundreds of years later like some skeptics claim. They're backed by thousands of manuscripts, early dating, and eyewitness connection. One author might be luck. 40 authors, 1,500 years, 3 continents. That's divine. Scholars like Dr. Norman Geisler, Qureshi, and Bart Ehrman confirm that 73 books, over 40 authors, 3 continents, 3 languages, written over 1,500 years, doesn't collapse under the weight of history. It's structured like a kingdom. That's the kind of system real estate investors crave. Stable, consistent, trustworthy. If God can maintain unity across centuries and cultures, He can handle your next season. Investors look for systems that can scale and sustain. The Bible has both. If Jesus is real and the Gospels are trustworthy, then His message is credible. The Gospels give us historic receipts. Jesus lived, died, and rose again. If He's real and what He taught us is credible, then the kingdom of God is not a side belief. It's the ruling framework for everything. Your business, your family, your purpose. But historical trust is just the beginning. Do you have a favorite piece of historical evidence about Jesus or the Gospels that we didn't cover? Drop it in the comments. We might feature it in a future episode. What if the story of Jesus wasn't just real, but foretold in staggering mathematical detail? That's next.